it's more like actually.
The world of work is undergoing a radical transformation as automation begins to sweep through sectors and businesses looking for productivity gains. The Future of Women at Work is a new McKinsey Global Institute report that was released today at the Women Deliver 2019 conference. This is the biggest gathering of women and people involved in gender activism across the world. Hello, my name is Justice Baidoo. I'm a journalist from Ghana, West Africa, and today I'll be hosting two senior partners from the McKinsey Global think tank to talk about what this report is about and what the future of work would mean for women. Hello and welcome for joining. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining us. Sandrine Devillard, you are a senior partner at McKinsey. Tell us what this report is about and why is it important to consider the future of work generally and how the future of work is going to be different for women.
Yes. Automation has the power to influence massively workers throughout the world, both men and women. But the impact it will have on the gendered workforce is going to be very different for both men and women. And it can be a wonderful opportunity, on the one hand, to close the gender gap. But if we do not take the right actions, it can be also an extra hurdle on the way to gender diversity for women.
So around the world, actually up to 1 in 4 women are going to need to change occupations by 2030. And as Sandrine was describing, work today is highly gendered. So around the world, women have about 70% of jobs in healthcare, but 20% or less machine operating jobs and other sort of craftsman jobs like that. And so because women and men tend to concentrate in different occupations, the impact of automation on those jobs is quite different. But across the board, for both women and men, up to 1 in 4 women are going to need to change occupations.
So which economies did McKinsey decide to survey for this particular report and how did you go about finding the figures in this report?
Yeah, we looked at 10 countries around the world, so 6 mature economies and 4 emerging economies. Together, they account for over 60% of global GDP and 50% of the global population. So the mature economies were the US and Canada, UK, Germany, France, and Japan, and the emerging economies were China, India, South Africa, and one other one as well. Yeah.
Right, and what were some of the barriers that you found out?
Yes, women face different barriers than men. Number one is the fact that the unpaid care work. Depending in countries, we know women can spend more, like 4 times more time in unpaid care work than men. Even in Canada, they spend on average 3 hours more in unpaid care work per day than men. So that would be the number one barrier. The second barrier has to do with the participation of women in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, where basically in Canada, even in Canada, only 1 out of 4 jobs in STEM is being occupied by the women. And last but not least, you still have also the unpaid, you still have the pay gap, which is going to be a hurdle. So if we do not pay attention, women could be at disadvantage facing automation.
Yeah.
Right, and at this conference this week, we've been speaking about what the future holds for women. And with all of these staggering figures that are coming out, what do you think this means for not just women, but the development of the globe generally?
I think what this means is that with up to 1 in 4 women and men needing to change occupations, we have to have a very strong focus on reskilling. And because the challenges that women are facing are going to be quite different in nature, right? To be successfully transitioned to a new occupation, women are going to need to have a really good skill match with the jobs of the future, which will be more technical. They'll need to have physical mobility to actually reach those jobs. And they'll also need to be quite tech savvy and understand how to use technology. And that will be a greater challenge for women. For example, in emerging economies, men are 33% more likely to have access to the internet. In the future, that will be a prerequisite to have jobs that are more technologically involved.
I find that really interesting, especially for where I'm coming from in Africa, where technology is really expensive, internet data is expensive. A lot of marginalized women do not have access to technology.
Yeah.
And so in this revolution where tech is really crucial for the future,
Absolutely.
they are losing out now.
Yep.
Yes.
What do you think could be done to change that in order that they are not if they lose out now, in the next 10 years, we are still not talking about women disadvantaged because they can't take part in the work that is available.
Absolutely. I think closing the gap on internet access, as you describe, as well as closing the gap on smartphone access is critical. And these days, smartphones are such an avenue to financial and broader digital inclusion. And in many instances, those could be the gateway to a job, right? Starting a small business, getting access to markets if you're a farmer. Technology and the internet are going to be so important for the future.
Right, and Sandrine, so this report is not just about the global level. There is also a Canada-specific report. Tell us about it and how does this dovetail into this whole global discussion?
Sure. So first and foremost, when we've done our Power of Parity report a few years ago, Kweilin, myself, and others, we found out that amongst all the countries we surveyed, it was like almost 200, Canada ranked number 10 in terms of gender diversity. So it's pretty good. We're looking at 15 different indicators of gender diversity. If we focus now on equality at work, in the workplace, we still find, however, room for improvement. And in particular, even though there has been, the pipeline is still very leaky. Right now in Canada, and we surveyed in detail 110 corporations, we found out that while women represent 50% of the entry position, they dwindle down all the way down, and they represent less than 30% of the VP level. And at the level of CEO, we're talking about 14% for our sample. Overall in Canada, it's more like 8%. And not only, do we have a leaky pipeline, but also 60% of women reporting having experienced some type of what we call microaggression at work. And when we talk microaggression, it's, for instance, compared to men in VP role, female VPs are 5 times more likely to have to prove their competence, 3 times more likely to be addressed as in what we call the less than professional manner. So there's still lots of room for improvement in gender equality in the workplace in Canada, which still in the ranks number 10 worldwide. And why is this important? This is important because if we do not close the gender gap now, based on everything we said, about automation, etc., it's going to be harder to close the gender gap in the future in the face of automation.
Right. That's very interesting, and I'll come back to that. But Kweilin, Canada has already been doing a lot of work globally in terms of supporting gender advocacy, human rights, women. And today, there's been an even bigger announcement of our 1.6 billion, which is going to go into more of this. First of all, how did you take the news, and what do you think that money should be going into? Looking at what this report is telling us now, what do you think would be the best use of this money that is going out now?
$1.4 billion. It was a very exciting announcement this morning by Prime Minister Trudeau. I think that will just further accelerate the development. And as you described, Canada being number 10 globally, it'll further accelerate that improvement in gender equality, both here in Canada, but also around the world. And investing in things like closing that technology, the internet access gap, will help in emerging economies. And here in Canada and other mature economies, helping with reskilling, given that up to 1 in 4 women are going to need to change occupations, but creating both government-sponsored and employer-sponsored reskilling programs with a very strong gender lens that, for instance, take into account childcare, take into account the ability to travel safely to that reskilling program. I think that would be a great use of that significant and very exciting investment.
Right. And how does that, I would still go back because I have been doing a couple of stories on Canadian-supported activities or in areas of ending child marriages, for example, in West Africa. And the issue is we are putting a lot of money in advocacy, which is good, and highlighting the issue. But then the sustainable way, which is getting people to stay in school for longer times, getting them into businesses or learning a trade that will make them self-reliant, is not there because local governments are not committing enough in that sector and then over-relying on donor support. Beyond putting out the money, what do you think, not just the Canadian government, but global leaders should be doing in this direction?
Yeah, there was a very exciting announcement yesterday by the President of Kenya, who was also here at Women Deliver at the opening plenary session, and he announced that secondary school is now required for both girls and boys in Kenya, and that's one of the biggest levers to reduce child marriage, as well as making it a crime to not send your kids to school. So not only is the school provided for free for girls and boys, but you must send your girls to school. And I think that is one of the biggest levers, as well as government collaboration around the world, so that there's better, faster spreading of best practices such as that.
Right.
And in more mature countries, I do believe that closing the gap on STEM is very important. The future will require to be much more versed in math, technology, so on and so forth. And unfortunately, it's not the case for girls right now. And not only do we have less students, but also then even after they studied STEM, they do not go in this profession. So this is going to be a major hurdle that needs to be addressed as soon as possible if we want to close the gap.
So in terms of Canada specific, what are the recommendations? What needs to be done immediately?
So we have it's like a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, companies needs to keep on focusing on the initiative they're doing. This year, we're very, very happy to realize that we have 4 times more companies which said that gender diversity is a priority for their organization. And this is critical because only if this is a priority can we make change happen. So that would be at the level of corporation. At the level of corporation also, we know that unfortunately, there's no such thing as a silver bullet. We're talking about implementing a full ecosystem, which has to do with, just like any change program, you need to set targets. You need to devise action. You need to have change agents. You must create programs. As you said, advocacy is not enough. You need to sponsor women. You need to train women. And then 2 very important things that you need to look at all your current practices to ensure that they are gender neutral. And right now, in the way we hire, we develop, we compensate women in Canada, we are gender biased in some places. And last but not least, we need to create an inclusive environment. Why? Because this is not only something, which is good, that needs to be done for ethical reasons. It is something which we've demonstrated in our report last year that could bring, by the way, growth to Canada as a country. We're talking about an increase of 0.6 point in GDP year on year. But then at the level of the government, etc., it's what Kweilin was talking about. Number one, being very clear about transparency. What are those new jobs being created? What are the skills needed to benefit from automation? That would be number one. Number 2, it's about, we said, reskilling, etc. Number 3, the STEM we spoke about. And last but not least, I think very important is to ensure not to be biased, because if we keep on, hiring the same type of profile, etc., to do those jobs of the future, women will be left on the side of progress. So it's very important that we completely de-biased our way of looking at things and that we're being inclusive. Because what we know is that the combination of gender, other elements of diversity, etc., is going to make it harder for those people to participate to this new economy.
But still on that, Canada is held up as sort of a global standard in terms of equality, investment in people, and all of that. Yourself, living here, did the results from this study shock you in any way? Were you surprised?
I think what was shocking, is the fact that the progress has not been very rapid in the past 10 years. So I think it's very important to bear in mind that we must accelerate and we must do it now. So that was shocking.
Right. Now, Kweilin, on the global level, we face many challenges, not least because there is a lot of instability in many parts of the world. We have a lot of global leaders who are not committing to some of the globally accepted protocols to help deal with some of these issues. We know how climate change and all of those are going to affect not just women, but development of everybody. How do you think we should move on from today? With all of the talk that is going to be done here, what are the concrete steps that should happen to ensure that we are able to deliver some of the recommendations that you've been speaking about today?
Yeah. I think the first step and the most important piece is to show how big of an economic opportunity this is for political leaders, for country and company leaders, that this is a huge opportunity for growth and that everybody, not just women, but families in the whole country stand to gain a lot from greater workforce participation. And then secondly, be very clear about what are the reskilling programs that are working. So some governments have already experimented in this space, Kenya, Singapore, others, and some companies have also worked with their employees on reskilling. And so I think sharing what's working and scaling that, because we're going to be talking about millions of women and men who need to change occupations, that scale is going to be required for success.
But for business owners and business leaders, someone will be asking, is this worth the sort of, I mean, you're saying retraining will mean investment, putting in more money. Would it be worth their money to be doing that? Because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, profit motives. And if business owners are not prepared to put in that,
Yeah. So what we found out is that you need a case for change to happen. And as part of the case for change, what Kweilin just said has been demonstrated over and over. The research that we've been doing, for many years, and McKinsey, we've been researching the topic for over 11 years, clearly points to the fact that there's a clear relationship between gender diversity and, by the way, diversity and performance and growth. So that's something which has been demonstrated over and over for many, many years. On top of that, you can also put other sense of meanings. It could be good for sustainability. It could be good for the image of your company. It could be good for other reasons, etc. But companies which are making progress are strongly convinced, that there's a very, very sound case for change, which is a combination of business imperative as well as other sources of meaning. And yes, I definitely would put my money behind this. It's something ethical to do, and it's something important to do and smart to do.
Absolutely.
Right. Kweilin? Yeah, so you think that it's something that is worth putting money into. But then on the global level, how do we go about it? Investing in the sort of skills training that will ensure that these women are going to benefit. Who should act? Who should we be talking to?
Yeah, I think governments need to act, given the scale that we're talking about of the millions, up to 160 million women, in a similar proportion, up to 1 in 4 men as well. Governments need to act, given that scale. Companies need to act. And I think there's an opportunity for partnership with NGOs as well. There are a number of examples where different companies have partnered with educational firms to, on a very digital or internet accessible platform, bring new training curriculums to millions of people. And so I think those types of scalable solutions are going to be really important so that you can meet women where they are in the time that they have, given a lot of the unpaid care work that we talked about, so that they can shift the skills to the jobs that are going to be in the future, but also overcome the mobility constraints and the technology access constraints that we were talking about.
Right, and so one of the other challenges that I see is donor support is being cut back generally the world over, and especially one of the places that we are suffering a lot is Africa and West Africa. We have had our health budget suffer a lot over the last 2 or 3 years because a lot of funding that used to come in is not coming in again because a lot of countries are now going beyond the lower middle income level and all of that. How are we going to address the funding deficit? I mean, we know Canada has done some sort of support today, but it's not the case with other developed countries.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest areas of challenge, right? There are pockets like Canada today and the announcement there that was exciting, but then as you describe, huge drops in funding in other parts of the world, particularly emerging economies. And I think by creating more scalable, more efficient in terms of the people you reach and the cost per person that you reach, we're going to have to be very creative to make the little funding that there is stretch a lot further.
Right.
But I do believe that addressing mindsets and behaviors is equally important as funding, because it's a barrier which is much more subtle, but that exists. And I would say that that would be should be one top priority.
Right. And listening to Prime Minister Trudeau, he seemed to be doing a lot, and also as a gender, he calls himself a feminist, and doing a lot. What do you think young people, young women in Canada think of? Is there change that is happening? Are they seeing this in their lives? Would they have hope seeing all of these figures that are coming from this report that you've just released? To see that this is going to happen? Are they going to be worse off, or positive change is going to happen?
Yes, I do not qualify as a young woman in Canada. I'm afraid I can for many reasons, age being one, and so I don't know. I hope that they are. They should. I think that they should be. They should rest assured that it's a country in which gender equality is one of the best in the world, and which has still very high expectations to progress. So it would make me being relieved, but I cannot comment. And we haven't studied, the young women in Canada, so I don't know. What we found out, however, and that we studied, is that we were talking a lot about the unpaid care work, which is an issue throughout the world, including in Canada. And when we've done the studies among the millennials, to our great surprise and disappointment, we found out that nothing has changed. And just looking, at home and looking at my millennial boy, I can confirm on an anecdotal basis that a few things don't change. So that's on the one hand, lots of hope. On the other hand, I mean, as I said, we need to change the mindsets and behaviors. And I think that working under the assumption, that things will improve by themselves, and maybe that the young Canadian men will start taking up more work than their predecessors, I think it's not a given. So we need to fight for that, even in Canada.
I think the good news for young women in Canada, but young women more globally, is that the remaining jobs impacted by automation that are on the other side will be more fulfilling jobs. They will have less daily data entry elements. So they will be higher paying jobs, and they will be more fulfilling jobs. And I think that's a very exciting prospect, both for young men and for young women. The other silver lining or exciting piece of news is that there will be entirely new job categories created. So jobs that we can't even imagine today. So if you picture today a machine learning analyst or a social media manager, those are jobs that 10, 20 years ago we wouldn't have imagined. And so up to 1 in 10 jobs in the future will also be in these new categories. Traditionally, at least in the United States, 60% of those new sort of frontier jobs, as we call them, were held by men, but they could be equally as held by women going forward.
Right, and I'm interested in the unpaid care work bit that you do. I recently did some work in Ghana on unpaid care work, and in the documentary I found that a lot of it has to do with cultural barriers. A lot of African men think that there are some household chores that are supposed to be done by women, and there are some that are supposed to be done by men. So washing dishes, washing clothes, taking care of children is supposed to be done by men, while by women, whilst men take up the more masculine sort of jobs in the house, and that sort of puts in place the barriers between men and women. It would be interesting to find out what you found to be the things that are keeping these unpaid care work still in place like Canada.
It's interesting because around the world, as Sandrine was describing, women do 3 times as much unpaid care work on average. And as you described, that looks very different country by country or region by region. So in Africa, you might spend more time getting firewood or going to get clean water. In India, women actually do almost 10 times as much unpaid care work as men. And as you look around the world, 70 to 80% of that unpaid care work is things like shopping, cooking, cleaning. It's the things that if they were reduced or shared more equally, would enable women to go out there in the formal economy and work. And right now, because it's so unequally shared, it's a real barrier for them to go outside of the home and work in a formal capacity.
Right. Do you feel the same way in terms of the things that still stand in the way of women in terms of unpaid care work? Why is it still persistent in a place like that?
I don't know why it is persistent, but what I know for a fact, if we don't take actions and if we do not communicate, things won't change, because they haven't changed for many years, including in Canada.
Right. Right. So now looking into the future, beyond this report that has been released, what is going to be done? What is McKinsey going to be doing? Is there any form of advocacy? How are you going to disseminate this report? Tell me about it.
We had a press release this morning, which was quite exciting, and we'll continue to share the findings and the implications with government leaders, with company leaders, so that action can be taken, particularly on the reskilling front, to help address those hundreds of millions of both women and men who will need to change occupations.
And how are people going to engage with these reports? Are there any avenues that people can download them, access them?
Absolutely. They're available online as of this morning. So McKinsey.com, and then there's a number of reports available there, including our 2 latest releases, both on the global view and the Canada view.
Right, and you were telling me that you have other reports that you are working on specific to Africa, for example?
Yes,
and
in
all of that.
a couple of months there will be an Africa-focused report on the future of work and the impact of automation for women and men across Africa.
And why has that become necessary? Is there any reason why you think that is something that we should look at, the future of work for?
It's such an important region, as you described,
Right.
and the impact of automation can be quite strong in countries. For example, in this global report, we looked at South Africa, and just looking at the transitions that are going to need to be made will be just a really important shift to make, not just in South Africa, but more broadly in Africa. So we wanted to take a particular look across Africa.
Right. Well, this has been an amazing experience hosting these very senior people on a topic that I consider very, very important. This morning, I was looking at some photos on Facebook, and someone was telling me about the things that stand in the way of women. And he put an example of a man and a woman who were running a race. And in front of the man, the track was clear, and he just had to get up and then run.
Yes.
And then in the track of the woman, he had waking up, bathing her baby, making sure her baby has food, making sure her husband has food, making sure her children are set for school, and all of that. And then the woman has to leap over all those hurdles to get on, whilst the man has his free space ahead of him. And so I find this report very, very important, and it is coming at a very crucial time. And I do hope that we are going to take this and rally around it and help ensure change, that the women of the future would benefit for the good of Canada and for the good of the world. Thank you very much, Sandrine Devillard and then Kweilin Ellingrud. I'm grateful. My name is Justice Baidoo, and I'm grateful to have hosted this session. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.